I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. I love you so much. It was December 27th, and I was sitting in my kitchen with my morning coffee, wondering why nobody had called on Christmas Day. The house felt unusually quiet, even for me. I'd spent the holiday alone, assuming there had been some miscommunication about plans. My son Matthew had been vague when I'd asked about Christmas a few weeks earlier, just saying they were still figuring things out. So, I decided to reach out to Rebecca, my daughter-in-law. We'd never been particularly close, but after 22 years of marriage to my son, she was family. I kept my text simple and friendly. Hi, Rebecca. Hope you all had a wonderful Christmas. Just wondering about our plans for New Year's. Should I prepare anything? The response came within minutes, and each word felt like a physical blow. Oops, we forgot to tell you. We went to Spain. Just me, your son, and your husband. Only the ones who really matter. You know. I stared at my phone screen, reading the message over and over. My husband of 43 years, Edward, had gone to Spain for Christmas without telling me, with my son Matthew and Rebecca, the three of them, the ones who really matter. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I set it down on the kitchen table and pressed my palms flat against the wood, trying to steady myself. This couldn't be real. Edward wouldn't do this to me. We'd been planning a quiet Christmas at home, or so I thought. But as the shock began to wear off, memories started flooding back. Edward saying he had business meetings the week of Christmas. Matthew's evasive answers when I asked about holiday plans. Rebecca's satisfied smirk at Thanksgiving dinner when she mentioned how some families know how to prioritize what's important. I walked to Edward's study, my legs feeling unsteady. His desk was cleared of the usual clutter. The calendar on the wall showed nothing marked for the Christmas week, but now I noticed faint eraser marks where something had been written and removed. In the trash can, I found crumpled boarding pass receipts. Madrid. 3 passengers. The reality hit me like ice water. They had planned this trip for weeks, maybe months. They had deliberately excluded me. Worse than that, they had lied to me, letting me spend Christmas alone while they were living it up in Europe. I sank into Edward's leather chair, the one I'd bought him for his 60th birthday. Everything in this room spoke of our life together, the books we'd discussed, the photos of our travels, the awards from his accounting firm where I'd worked beside him for 30 years before retiring. Had it all meant nothing to him? My phone buzzed with another text from Rebecca. Don't be dramatic about it, Nancy. We needed family time. You understand, right? Family time without me. I wasn't family anymore, apparently. The cruelest part was how casually they'd done it. No argument, no confrontation, no explanation. They'd simply erased me from their Christmas, from their family, from their lives, as if I were so insignificant that my absence wouldn't even be noticed by anyone who mattered. I thought about my sister Eleanor in Oregon, who'd called on Christmas Day. Where's Edward? She'd asked. Oh, he's resting. I'd lied, not wanting to admit I didn't know where my own husband was. Now I understood why he hadn't come to the phone. For hours, I sat in that chair, feeling smaller and smaller. I was 67 years old, married for 43 years, mother to 1 son, and apparently I had become so invisible that my own family could take a Christmas vacation without me and consider it perfectly reasonable. But then something else began to creep in alongside the hurt. Something that felt dangerous and unfamiliar. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind that burns out quickly. This was cold and steady, growing stronger with each breath. Because as I sat there in Edward's study, surrounded by the evidence of our shared life, I began to think about other things, important things, like whose name was on the mortgage of this house, whose retirement account had funded their comfortable lifestyle, whose inheritance from my parents had paid for Matthew's college, his wedding, the down payment on his first house, whose careful financial planning had allowed Edward to retire early and enjoy these golden years. Mine, all mine. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found my financial advisor's number. It was after hours, but I left a message. James, this is Nancy Clark. I need to meet with you first thing tomorrow morning. It's urgent. Then I called my bank's 24-hour customer service line. First National Bank, how can I help you? I need to discuss my accounts, I said, my voice steadier than it had been all day. All of them. As I spoke to the representative, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Control. For the first time since reading that devastating text message, I wasn't just reacting to what had been done to me. I was planning what I would do about it. They thought I was just a lonely old lady who didn't matter. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to really think about the changes I'd been ignoring. The signs had been there all along. Hadn't they? I'd just been too trusting, too willing to believe the best of the people I loved. It started coming back to me in pieces, like a puzzle I'd been too blind to assemble. 3 months ago, Edward had begun working late more often. Just catching up on some client files, he'd said when I questioned the sudden change in routine. But Edward had been semi-retired for 2 years. What clients, when I'd asked to see him off at his office one morning, he'd gotten flustered. No need, Nancy. You'd just be bored. He'd never minded my company before. Then there was Thanksgiving. We'd hosted Matthew and Rebecca as we had for the past 15 years, but this time felt different. They'd arrived late, claiming traffic. Though Matthew's car wasn't particularly dirty for a long drive, Rebecca had been unusually animated, almost giddy, talking about all the exciting changes coming up. When I'd asked what she meant, she just smiled and said, "Oh, you'll see." I remembered how they'd huddled together in the living room after dinner while I cleaned up. Usually, Matthew would help me with the dishes. It was our tradition, our time to catch up. But when I'd called him into the kitchen, Rebecca had said, "Let him relax, Nancy. He's had such a stressful week." Since when did Rebecca speak for my son? The conversation had stopped abruptly when I'd walked into the living room with coffee. Edward had been leaning forward, speaking in low tones, but he'd sat back quickly when he saw me. "Just talking about the weather," he'd said, but it was November. Who gets excited about weather? Now I understood. They'd been planning the Spain trip, discussing logistics, probably laughing about how easy it would be to fool me. But the signs went back even further than Thanksgiving. In September, Rebecca had started making comments about my age, little things, supposedly harmless. "Nancy, you seem tired lately. Are you feeling all right?" When I was feeling perfectly fine. "Maybe you should consider one of those medical alert systems. You never know at your age." I was 67, not 90. She'd also begun suggesting I might be confused about things. When I'd mentioned that Matthew had promised to help me organize the garage, Rebecca had laughed. "Oh, Nancy, that was last year. Don't you remember we already did that?" But we hadn't. The garage was still a mess. Edward had started backing her up on these little corrections. "You're getting forgetful, dear," he'd say gently when I'd insist I was right about something. It was so subtle, so consistent that I'd begun to doubt myself. Had I really forgotten that conversation with Matthew? Was I becoming confused? The most painful memory was from October. I'd been planning our 40th wedding anniversary celebration for January. Nothing elaborate, just dinner with Matthew and Rebecca at our favorite restaurant. I'd mentioned it to Rebecca, excited to share the planning. Her response had been a pitying smile. "Oh, Nancy, Ed and I already talked about this. He thinks a quiet evening at home would be better for you. All that excitement might be too much." Ed. She'd called him Ed. Something she'd never done before. And when had my husband discussed our anniversary plans with Rebecca instead of me, I'd felt hurt then. But I'd pushed it down. Maybe Edward really had mentioned it to her. Maybe I was being oversensitive. Marriage required compromise, didn't it? But now, lying in my empty bed while my husband was presumably sleeping in some Spanish hotel, I saw it clearly. They'd been gaslighting me for months, making me question my memory, my perceptions, my worth. They'd been preparing me to be left behind. The morning after Thanksgiving, I'd found Edward and Matthew in the study with papers spread across the desk. They'd quickly gathered them up when I'd brought them coffee. "Just boring financial stuff," Edward had said. "Nothing you need to worry about." Nothing I needed to worry about in a marriage where I'd handled most of our financial planning for decades. I'd been excluded from conversations, decisions, planning. They'd made me feel like an intruder in my own life, and I'd let them do it because I loved them, because I trusted them. The week before Christmas, when Edward claimed he had those mysterious business meetings, I'd offered to iron his shirts. "No need," he'd said quickly. "I'll take them to the dry cleaner." Edward hated the expense of dry cleaning. He always said my ironing was better than any professional service. Matthew had been just as secretive. His usual weekly phone calls had become brief and awkward. When I'd asked about his work, his answers were vague. When I'd mentioned Christmas plans, he'd changed the subject. I'd attributed it to holiday stress. But now I knew better. He'd been lying to me, just like his father. The cruelest part was how normal they'd acted. Edward had kissed me goodbye that morning in December like any other day. "See you tonight, dear," he'd said, but he hadn't come home that night, or the next, and I'd believed his texts about extended meetings, about staying in a hotel near the office. I'd even worried about him, texted him to be careful driving in the winter weather. He'd been in Spain with my son and daughter-in-law, planning excursions, sharing meals, creating memories, a family vacation without me. I got up and walked to the window, looking out at our snow-covered yard. Edward and I had planted those trees together 30 years ago. We'd built the deck where we'd had countless barbecues with Matthew's friends. We'd painted this house room by room, chosen every fixture together. Or had we? Now I wasn't sure what was real anymore. I thought about Rebecca's text again. Only the ones who really matter. She'd been establishing a hierarchy, and I wasn't in it. My husband of 43 years, my only child, my daughter-in-law, they'd formed their own family unit, and I was expendable. But here's what they didn't realize. Here's what their months of manipulation and lies had overlooked. Everything they'd enjoyed, that trip to Spain, their comfortable lifestyle, their financial security, it all traced back to me, my inheritance, my decades of careful saving, my financial contributions that had allowed Edward to retire early and Matthew to buy his house. They thought they could push me aside because I was just a wife, just a mother. They thought my role was to quietly fade into the background while they lived their lives. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. The next morning, I sat across from James Wilson in his downtown office, watching his expression change as I laid out the documents I'd gathered. James had been our financial advisor for 12 years, and I'd never seen him look this uncomfortable. "Nancy, I need to be completely honest with you," he said, adjusting his glasses nervously. "Edward came to see me 3 weeks ago. He asked about transferring some assets, restructuring certain accounts." My stomach dropped. "What kind of restructuring?" James pulled out a thick file. "He wanted to know about putting Matthew on several of your joint accounts. He said you were experiencing some memory issues and that it would be prudent to have backup access." Memory issues. There it was again, that careful campaign to paint me as incompetent. "James," I said slowly, "I want you to pull up every account we have, every investment, every certificate of deposit, every savings account. I want to see exactly what's in my name, what's in Edward's name, and what's joint." For the next hour, James walked me through our financial portfolio. What I discovered made me physically ill. Of our $1.2 million in assets, nearly 70% was in my name alone. My parents had left me a substantial inheritance when they passed away 15 years ago. I'd been careful with that money, investing it wisely, watching it grow. What I'd forgotten, in all my years of thinking of Edward and me as a team, was that I'd kept most of those assets separate for tax purposes. The house was in my name. I'd inherited it from my parents, and we'd never changed the deed because our lawyer had advised it would be more tax efficient to keep it that way. Edward had always joked that he was living in my house, but I'd never thought of it as anything other than ours. My retirement account, built up over 30 years of working, was obviously mine alone. But even our joint savings account was primarily funded by my contributions. Edward's accounting firm had done well, but he'd been generous with his spending over the years. Golf club memberships, expensive dinners, spontaneous weekend trips. I'd been the one quietly replenishing our savings. "James," I says, "Sid," my voice steady despite the churning in my stomach. If Edward tried to access any of these accounts without me, would he be able to? James shifted uncomfortably. The joint accounts, yes. But Nancy, about 70% of your wealth is in accounts where you're the sole owner. He'd need your signature or power of attorney to touch those. Power of attorney? Is that what those papers in the study had been about? Had Edward been planning to have me declared incompetent? I want to make some changes, I told James. Starting today. I spent the rest of the morning restructuring everything. I moved all funds from our joint accounts into new accounts in my name only. I changed beneficiaries on my retirement accounts and life insurance policies. I updated passwords on every online account. James looked increasingly troubled as we worked. Nancy, are you sure about this? These are major changes. Maybe you should discuss them with Edward first. Edward is in Spain, I said simply. He didn't discuss that with me. By noon, Edward had access to exactly one account, his own small checking account with about $3,000. Everything else was now protected. But I wasn't done. My next stop was the bank where we'd had our mortgage for 20 years. The house was paid off now, but I wanted to understand all the implications of sole ownership. Mrs. Clark, the mortgage officer said, pulling up our records. I remember when you and your husband paid off the loan early. That was smart financial planning. Actually, I said, reviewing the records. I see that the final payments came from my account specifically. She nodded. Yes, you made that large payment from your inheritance funds. Saved you thousands in interest. My inheritance funds, my decision, my money that had freed us from a mortgage payment and allowed Edward to retire comfortably. From the bank, I drove to Matthew's neighborhood. I'd been thinking about something that had bothered me for months. Last spring, Matthew and Rebecca had bought a new car, an expensive SUV that they'd been excited to show off. When I'd asked how they'd managed such a purchase on Matthew's teacher salary, they'd been vague. Now, I sat in my car outside their house, looking at that SUV in the driveway, and I pulled out my phone to check something I'd forgotten about. 6 months ago, Edward had asked me to sign some papers. Just updating our will, he'd said. Nothing major, but there had been other papers mixed in. I'd signed them without reading carefully because I trusted my husband. I called James back. James, I need you to check something for me. 6 months ago, did we make any loans or gifts to family members? There was a pause. Let me look. Yes, Nancy, there was a $20,000 transfer to Matthew Clark. It was categorized as a family gift. $20,000. Enough for a down payment on that SUV. Money that had come from my accounts, with my signature. But I'd had no idea what I was really signing. James, I need copies of every document I signed that day, and I want to see exactly where that money came from. The money had come from my investment account, my money gifted to my son, without my knowledge or real consent. I sat in my car outside Matthew's house, staring at the SUV I'd unknowingly purchased for them, and I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about being excluded from a Christmas trip. This was about years of financial manipulation. They'd been using my money while systematically pushing me out of their lives. But here's what really made my blood boil. I remembered now that Matthew had called me the week after they bought that car. He'd thanked me for being so understanding about money being tight. He'd asked if I could help with their electric bill that month. I'd sent him $500 worried that my son was struggling financially, all while he was driving around in a car I'd unknowingly bought for him. My phone rang. Edward's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment, then declined the call. Immediately, he called back. I declined again. The third time, I answered. Nancy, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. There seems to be some problem with our accounts. The hotel can't process our credit card. And when I called the bank, how's Spain? Edward's silence. Nancy, I can explain. I'm sure you can. But I'm not interested in explanations right now. Now look, you're being dramatic. It was just a small trip. Rebecca thought it would be good for Matthew to have some time with his father. And you've been so tired lately. Tired, right. Just like I've been forgetful and confused and difficult. Another pause. Nancy, what have you done? I've taken control of my own finances. Something I should have done a long time ago. You can't just cut off access to our money. My money, Edward. Most of it has always been my money. I could hear Rebecca's voice in the background, sharp and angry, though I couldn't make out the words. Nancy, we need to discuss this when I get home. Don't do anything else until we can talk. When will that be? You forgot to mention your travel dates. We'll be back tomorrow. Nancy, please, whatever you think happened, we can work it out. What I think happened. Edward, you took a family vacation without me. You lied to me for weeks. You've been letting Rebecca convince everyone that I'm losing my mind so you could what? Exactly take over my finances, have me declared incompetent. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Explain to me how a man spends Christmas in Spain with his son and daughter-in-law, but leaves his wife at home thinking he's working. I could hear Rebecca more clearly now. She was saying something about dramatic old women and ungrateful. Put Rebecca on the phone, I said. Nancy, that's not necessary. Put her on the phone. Edward? There was a pause, some muffled conversation, then Rebecca's voice, dripping with fake sweetness. Hi, Nancy. I hope you're not upset about our little trip. It was really last minute, and we thought you might prefer staying home. Rebecca, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You have 48 hours to return the $20,000 that was transferred to Matthew's account 6 months ago. Silence. I don't know what you're talking about. The money for your car. The money my husband had me sign for without telling me what it was for. That was a gift. You can't take back a gift. Watch me. More silence. Nancy, you're being unreasonable. That money is gone. We used it for expenses. Then you'd better figure out how to replace it, because as of today, the bank account that funded your little Spanish vacation is closed. The credit cards you've been using are canceled. And if you want any financial support from this family going forward, you'll need to start treating me like I actually belong in it. I could hear her saying something to Edward, her voice rising. Edward came back on the line. Nancy, you're making a huge mistake. We're a family. We work these things out together. You're right, Edward. Families do work things out together. They don't lie to each other. They don't steal from each other. And they sure as hell don't abandon each other on Christmas. I hung up. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The next 24 hours were the most empowering of my life. For decades, I'd been the supportive wife, the understanding mother, the one who quietly made things work behind the scenes. Now, for the first time, I was acting entirely for myself. I started by changing every password on every account they'd ever had access to. Online banking, credit cards, investment portfolios, even the streaming services they used at their house. It felt petty, but it also felt necessary. They needed to understand that nothing in our lives would be assumed anymore. Then I called my lawyer, Dr. Samantha Torres. We'd used her for estate planning years ago, and I trusted her discretion. Nancy, I'm glad you called, Samantha said when I explained the situation. What you're describing sounds like financial elder abuse, even if it's coming from family members. Is that what this is? Systematic manipulation to access your finances while undermining your confidence and autonomy? Yes, that's exactly what it is. The good news is that since most of the assets are in your name, you have significant control here. Samantha walked me through the legal implications of what I was doing. Everything I'd done so far was completely within my rights. The joint accounts had been mine to close. The credit cards had been mine to cancel. Even the $29,000 given to Matthew could potentially be recovered as an undisclosed gift obtained through deception. What about the house? I asked. It's yours. Period. If Edward has been living there as your husband, he has some rights, but they're limited. You could ask him to leave if you wanted to. I hadn't considered that possibility, but now it lingered in my mind. Samantha, I need to understand something. If Edward tried to have me declared incompetent, what would that process look like? Her voice became serious. It would require medical evaluations, court hearings, substantial evidence of cognitive decline. Has anyone suggested you're having memory issues? I told her about the months of subtle suggestions, the gentle corrections, the implications that I was becoming confused or forgetful. Nancy, that's a common tactic. If you gaslight someone long enough, you can make them doubt their own competence. It also creates a narrative that can be useful later if you want to challenge their legal capacity. The pieces were falling into place. They hadn't just excluded me from Christmas. They'd been building a case against my mental competence, possibly for months. I want you to arrange for an independent cognitive evaluation, I told Samantha. I want medical documentation that I'm completely competent to make my own decisions. Smart thinking. I'll set that up today. After I hung up with Samantha, I drove to the bank one more time. I needed to understand exactly what Edward and Matthew would face when they tried to access funds that were no longer available. The banker explained that the canceled credit cards would be declined for any new charges. The closed joint accounts would trigger notifications to both account holders. Edward would still be able to access his small personal checking account, but that wouldn't last long in Spain. What about automatic payments? I asked. Any automatic payments from the closed accounts will be declined. You'll need to review what you want to continue and set up new payment methods. I thought about this. Our house insurance, utilities, car payments, all the practical expenses of our life together. I could let them all lapse, force Edward to deal with the chaos when he returned. But that would hurt me too. Instead, I did something more strategic. I set up new automatic payments for everything essential, but only from my personal accounts. The house would stay insured and heated, but it would be clearly my house, maintained with my money. Then I thought about Matthew and Rebecca's situation. If they'd been relying on occasional gifts from us, from me, to supplement their lifestyle, they were about to face some difficult realities. I called their mortgage company. I'd like to understand the payment history on a property, I said, giving them Matthew's address. I'm sorry, but I can only provide that information to the account holder. What if I told you I was considering helping with payments? Would you be able to tell me if the account is current? There was a pause. I can tell you that the account you're asking about is currently 37 days past due. 37 days. They were behind on their mortgage and probably counting on Christmas money from us to catch up. I felt a moment of maternal concern, then remembered Rebecca's text. Only the ones who really matter. My phone had been buzzing constantly with calls from Edward. I'd been declining them, but now I listened to one of his voicemails. Nancy, this is ridiculous. You're stranding us in Spain. Rebecca is crying. Matthew doesn't understand what's happening. Just call me back so we can fix this. Rebecca was crying. The woman who'd excluded me from Christmas and called me irrelevant was crying because her vacation had been disrupted. I called James again. James, I want to understand the tax implications of gifts to family members. If I gave Matthew $20,000 without realizing it was a gift, can I count that against future inheritance limits? Absolutely. In fact, you can declare it as part of his lifetime gift allowance. If you wanted to be very strict about it, you could even demand its return if it was given under false pretenses. I made another decision. I called Matthew's school district. Hi, this is Nancy Clark, Matthew Clark's mother. I'm trying to reach him about a family matter. I'm sorry, Mrs. Clark, but Matthew is on vacation this week. He won't be back until January 3rd. Of course. Vacation. Thank you. So, Matthew had taken time off work for this Spain trip. This wasn't spontaneous or last minute. They'd planned this for weeks, coordinated time off, booked flights, arranged hotels. The level of deception was staggering. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my sister Eleanor in Oregon. Nancy, how was your Christmas? I was worried when Edward didn't come to the phone the other day. I told her everything. The excluded vacation, the financial manipulation, the months of gaslighting. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her anger building with each detail. That son of a, she said finally. And Matthew, I can't believe Matthew went along with this. I don't think I really know my son anymore, I admitted. What are you going to do? I'm not sure yet, but I'm done being the family doormat. Good. You know, Nancy, Mom always said you were too generous for your own good. She worried that people would take advantage of your kindness. Our mother had been gone for 15 years, but I could hear her voice in my memory. Trust, but verify. She used to say. I'd forgotten the second part of that advice. Late that night, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, making lists. What did I want from my life going forward? What was I willing to tolerate? What needed to change for 43 years? I'd defined myself as Edward's wife and Matthew's mother. But who was Nancy Clark when she wasn't taking care of everyone else? I thought about the trips Edward and I had talked about taking, but never did because Matthew needed help with something. The hobbies I'd abandoned because family obligations came first. The friendships I'd let lapse because Edward preferred staying home. I picked up my laptop and started browsing travel websites. I'd always wanted to see Italy. Edward had never been interested, said European food disagreed with him, but there was nothing stopping me from going alone. Within an hour, I'd bookmarked a 2-week tour of Tuscany that departed in February. The cost would be significant, but it was my money. I deserved to spend it on something that made me happy. My phone rang again. Edward. This time I answered. Nancy, thank God. We've been trying to reach you all day. I've been busy. Look, we need to talk about this situation. Rebecca spoke to a lawyer here in Madrid, and he says what you're doing could be considered financial abuse. I laughed. Actually laughed. Financial abuse, Edward, let me explain something to you. You took my money, lied to me for months, excluded me from a family vacation, and had me sign documents without explaining what they were. That's financial abuse. You're being dramatic. No, I'm being accurate. And here's what's going to happen. You're going to figure out how to get home from Spain without my credit cards. When you get here, we're going to have a conversation about the future of this marriage. And Matthew is going to return the $20,000 I unknowingly gave him. That's impossible. They don't have that kind of money. Then they shouldn't have spent mine. I could hear Rebecca in the background again, her voice higher and more frantic than before. Put Rebecca on, I said. Nancy, that's not necessary. Put her on the phone, Edward, or I'll hang up and you won't reach me again until you're back in the country. After a moment, Rebecca came on the line. Her voice was shaky now, none of the smugness from the previous day. Nancy, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We never meant to exclude you. The trip was just so last minute, and we thought you might not enjoy the travel. Rebecca, stop lying. You planned this trip for weeks. Matthew took vacation time from work. You booked hotels and flights. This was deliberately planned without me. That's not true. Rebecca, I need you to understand something. For years, you've been treating me like an inconvenience in my own family. You've undermined my relationship with my son, convinced my husband that I'm becoming incompetent, and helped yourself to my money. That ends now. I don't know what you're talking about. The $20,000 for your car, the constant suggestions that I'm forgetful or confused, the way you speak for Matthew when I try to talk to him, the way you've gradually taken over my role in family decisions. Silence. Here's what's going to happen, Rebecca. When you get back from Spain, you and I are going to have a very honest conversation about your future relationship with this family. And that relationship is going to depend entirely on whether you can learn to treat me with basic respect. You can't threaten me. I'm not threatening you. I'm explaining reality. The money you've been spending, the comfortable lifestyle you've enjoyed, the financial support you've counted on. It all comes from me. And if you want it to continue, you'll need to earn it. I heard her say something to Edward, her voice rising to near hysteria. Edward came back on the line. Nancy, you're destroying this family. No, Edward. You destroyed it when you chose to lie to me for months. When you chose Rebecca's opinion over our marriage vows. When you chose to treat me like a burden instead of a partner. You did. You all did. And now you're dealing with the consequences. What do you want from us? It was the first time he'd asked what I wanted instead of telling me what I should accept. I want honesty. I want respect. I want to be included in decisions that affect my life. And I want acknowledgement that you've all treated me terribly. And if we do that, then maybe we can rebuild something. But it won't be the same as before. Edward, I won't be the same as before. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet house, feeling something I hadn't experienced in decades. Peace. For the first time in my marriage, I wasn't worried about what Edward needed, what Matthew wanted, what would make everyone else happy. I was thinking about what I needed, what I wanted, what would make me happy. And what I wanted was a life where I mattered, where my voice was heard, where my contributions were acknowledged and respected. If my family couldn't give me that, then maybe it was time to find a new family, one that actually deserved me. They came back 2 days early, and not by choice. I was in my kitchen making breakfast when I heard Edward's key in the front door, the sound of suitcases dropping in the hallway, hushed, urgent voices, then footsteps toward the kitchen. Edward appeared in the doorway, looking haggard. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his expensive vacation clothes wrinkled. Behind him, Matthew looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. Rebecca pushed past them both, her face flushed with anger. "We need to talk," Edward said, his voice carefully controlled. "Good morning to you, too," I replied, not looking up from buttering my toast. "How was the rest of your trip? Nancy, don't play games. Do you have any idea what you've put us through?" I took a sip of my coffee and finally looked at them. 3 people who'd been living it up in Spain while I sat alone on Christmas, now standing in my kitchen like I owed them something. "Actually, no. Why don't you tell me—" Rebecca stepped forward, her composure barely contained. "You left us stranded. We couldn't pay for anything. The hotel threatened to call the police when our cards were declined. We had to borrow money from other guests just to eat." "How terrible for you," I said calmly. "This is cruel, Nancy," Matthew said, finally speaking. "Whatever you think we did, this was vindictive." I set down my coffee cup and looked at my son, really looked at him. When had he become this person? When had he learned to speak to his mother like I was the problem? "Matthew, sit down. All of you, sit down." They remained standing, a united front against me. "Fine, stand if you prefer, but you're going to listen to what I have to say." I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I'd taken of the financial documents James had shown me. "Edward, can you explain to me why you went to our financial advisor 3 weeks ago asking about transferring my assets?" His face went pale. "That was just prudent planning." "Prudent planning for what? For having me declared incompetent for taking control of my money." "That's not what that was about." "Then what was it about? Because James showed me the paperwork you were asking about. Power of attorney documents, asset transfers. What exactly were you planning?" Rebecca crossed her arms. "Nancy, you're being paranoid. Ed was just trying to help organize things better." "Ed?" I looked at her. "Since when do you call my husband Ed?" "That's what he asked me to call him." I turned to Edward. "Is that true?" He shifted uncomfortably. "It's not important. It's important to me. When did you start asking my daughter-in-law to call you by a nickname you've never used with anyone else?" The silence stretched between us. "I want to know about the Spain trip," I continued. "How long had you been planning it? Nancy, Matthew? I'm asking you directly. How long?" My son looked at his father, then at Rebecca, then finally at me. "Since October." October. So for 2 months, while I was planning our anniversary dinner, while I was asking about Christmas arrangements, while I was worrying that you all seemed distant, you were planning a family vacation without me. It wasn't like that. What was it like? Matthew, explain it to me. Rebecca stepped forward again. It was supposed to be a father-son trip, a chance for Ed and Matthew to reconnect. And you went because Matthew wanted me there. I looked at my son. Is that true? Matthew, you wanted your wife on a father-son trip. Matthew's face flushed. Mom, it's complicated. No, it's really not. Either you wanted a trip with your father, or you wanted a trip without your mother. Which was it? You wouldn't have enjoyed it, Rebecca said quickly. All that travel, the different foods, the language barrier. We thought you'd be more comfortable at home. Did you ask me? Did anyone ask me if I wanted to go to Spain for Christmas? Did anyone give me the option to decide for myself whether I'd enjoy it? None of them answered. Of course not, because this was never about what I'd enjoy. This was about what you all wanted, and I wasn't part of that. I stood up and walked to the counter where I'd laid out more documents. Let's talk about money, since that seems to be what this is really about. I turned back to face them, holding the bank statements. Edward, of our loan, $2 million in assets. How much do you think is actually yours? What do you mean? I mean, How much of our wealth came from your income versus mine? He looked uncomfortable. Nancy, we've always shared everything. That's not what I asked. Matthew, did you know that the $20,000 you received for your car came entirely from my inheritance money? Matthew's face went white. What are you talking about? The money your father had me sign for 6 months ago. I thought I was updating our will. Instead, I was gifting you $20,000 of my money. Money you used to buy a car while asking me to help with your electric bill. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, because none of you have ever bothered to understand where our family's money actually comes from. I spread the documents on the kitchen table. 70% of our assets are in my name alone. The house is mine. The investment accounts are primarily mine. Even our joint savings account was funded mostly by my contributions. Edward stepped forward. Nancy, what are you getting at? I'm getting at the fact that you've all been living off my money while treating me like I don't matter. You've been excluding me from decisions about our life while depending on my financial support. Rebecca's voice rose. That's not fair. We never asked you for money. You didn't have to ask. It was just expected. Matthew's down payment on his house, my money. Your car, my money. This Spain trip, paid for with credit cards that I fund. I pulled out another document. Matthew, your mortgage is 37 days past due. Were you planning to ask me for help with that? My son looked stricken. How do you know about that? Because I called your mortgage company. Because I wanted to understand what financial pressures might have motivated this family conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy, Rebecca said, but her voice lacked conviction. What would you call it? Rebecca lying to me for months about vacation plans, manipulating me into signing financial documents, systematically undermining my confidence while accessing my money. I sat back down, feeling suddenly tired. Here's what I think happened. I think you all realize that I control most of our family's wealth. I think that made you uncomfortable, maybe even resentful. I think you decided it would be easier to manage me than to respect me. Edward sat down heavily. Nancy, that's not how it was. Then how was it? Edward, because from where I sit, it looks like you've been planning to sideline me financially while Rebecca works on sidelining me emotionally. I never tried to sideline you, Rebecca protested. Really, the constant suggestions that I'm forgetful, the way you speak for Matthew when I try to talk to him, the way you've gradually taken over family planning and decision-making. I turned to my son. Matthew, when's the last time you and I had a conversation without Rebecca present? He thought about it, his face troubled. I don't remember. I do. It was 6 months ago, before Rebecca started insisting that family discussions needed to include everyone. She was trying to be inclusive. She was trying to control the narrative. And it worked, didn't it? You barely talk to me anymore unless she's there to manage the conversation. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Edward spoke. What do you want from us, Nancy? I want honesty. I want respect. And I want acknowledgement that you've all betrayed my trust. And then what? Matthew asked quietly. Then we see if there's anything left to rebuild. Rebecca had been quiet for several minutes, but now she exploded. This is ridiculous. You're acting like we committed some terrible crime. We took a vacation. We made some financial decisions. That's what families do. Families don't lie to each other for months. Nancy, you told me you forgot to mention the trip. But Matthew took vacation time from work. You booked hotels. You planned this for months. That's not forgetting. That's lying. Fine, we lied. Are you happy now? We lied because we knew you'd make it difficult. You'd want to change the plans or add your own requirements or find some way to make it about you. The mask was finally off. Make it about me. Rebecca, it was supposed to be about family. I am family. You're Matthew's mother. That doesn't mean you get to control everything we do. I never tried to control anything. I just wanted to be included. You wanted to be included in everything. Every decision, every plan, every conversation. It's suffocating. Edward and Matthew both looked alarmed by Rebecca's outburst, but she kept going. Do you know what it's like being married to someone whose mother calls every day, who expects to be consulted about every choice we make, who acts like she's still the most important woman in Matthew's life? Rebecca, stop, Matthew said quietly. No, someone needs to say this. Your mother has never accepted that you're married. She still acts like she comes first, like our marriage is secondary to your relationship with her. I felt like I'd been slapped. Is that what you think? It's what I know. Every time we make plans, you need to be included. Every time we have news, you expect to be the first to hear it. You still act like Matthew is your little boy instead of my husband. I looked at my son. Matthew, is that how you feel? He wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom, sometimes it does feel like you have trouble letting go. The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything I'd discovered about their deception, they were making this about me being too involved in their lives. I see, I said quietly. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the yard where Matthew had played as a child. The swing set was still there, though he'd outgrown it decades ago. I'd never taken it down because I loved the memories. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe I had been holding on too tightly to a relationship that had already changed. But that didn't excuse their behavior. It didn't justify the lies, the financial manipulation, the deliberate cruelty. I turned back to face them. You're right, Rebecca. I have had trouble accepting that Matthew is married. I've probably been too involved in your lives. Relief flickered across her face. But that doesn't excuse what you've done. You could have talked to me about boundaries. You could have asked for space. Instead, you chose deception and manipulation. The relief faded. So here's what's going to happen. You want space? You'll have it. You want independence? You'll get it. Completely. I walked back to the table and picked up the documents. Matthew, you have 30 days to return the $20,000 I unknowingly gave you. If you can't manage that, we'll work out a payment plan with interest. Mom, Edward, you have 1 week to decide whether you want to be married to me or whether you'd prefer to be single. If you choose marriage, we'll need counseling. If you choose single, we'll need lawyers. Nancy, you can't be serious. And Rebecca, I continued, not letting him finish. You'll have no financial support from this family until you learn to treat me with basic respect. No more gifts, no more emergency loans, no more credit cards that I pay for. Rebecca's face was red with anger. You can't cut us off. We're family. Family treats each other with love and respect. What you've shown me is neither. I walked toward the kitchen door, then turned back. You all wanted to show me that I don't matter. Mission accomplished. Now you get to find out what your lives look like when I actually don't matter. I left them sitting in my kitchen and went upstairs to my bedroom. Through the window, I could see them loading back into Matthew's car, their voices raised in argument. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something approaching peace. They were right about one thing. I had been holding on too tightly, trying to maintain relationships that had already shifted beyond recognition. But they were wrong about something, too. Letting go didn't mean disappearing. It meant choosing myself for once. And that's exactly what I intended to do. That night, I opened my laptop and finalized the booking for my Tuscany tour. I even splurged on the premium package that included cooking classes and wine tastings. As I entered my credit card information, I felt a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. I'd never traveled alone before. Edward had always been the one who handled arrangements, who decided where we would go and what we would do. Now I would be making all those decisions for myself. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. After booking the trip, I called Eleanor. You did what? She exclaimed when I told her about the confrontation. Nancy, I'm so proud of you. It's about time you stood up for yourself. I feel like I'm having an out-of-body experience, I admitted. I've never spoken to Edward that way. I've never given Matthew an ultimatum. Well, it sounds like they gave you no choice. So what's your plan now? Honestly, I'm not sure. I just booked a trip to Italy for February. Other than that, I'm taking it one day at a time. Are you really going to make Matthew pay back that money? I hesitated. I'm not sure. Part of me wants to forgive the debt. He's still my son, and I love him. But another part of me thinks that would just be enabling more of the same behavior. They need to understand that actions have consequences. What about Edward? Do you think he'll choose the marriage? I don't know, I said truthfully. Right now, I'm not even sure what I want him to choose. The following days passed in a strange new rhythm. I hadn't heard from any of them since they'd left my house. The silence was painful but also clarifying. If they couldn't even manage a phone call or text message after everything that had happened, that told me more about the state of our relationships than any words could have. I focused on reclaiming my home and my life. I cleaned out Edward's closet, boxing up his golf trophies and the collection of fancy ties I'd given him over the years. I didn't throw anything away. That felt too vindictive. But I needed the space for myself. I called old friends I hadn't seen in months, even years. I joined the local community center's art class, something I'd always wanted to do but had never prioritized. I started walking in the park every morning, finding a peaceful rhythm in the solitude. On the third day, Dr. Torres called to confirm my cognitive evaluation. We have an appointment with Dr. Mendez on Thursday at 10 a.m. He's one of the best neurologists in the state. If anyone questions your competence in the future, his assessment will carry significant weight. Thank you, Samantha. I appreciate you arranging this so quickly. Nancy, have you given any more thought to what you want from the marriage? I sighed. I'm still processing everything. Part of me feels like I should try to salvage 43 years of marriage, but another part wonders if what we had was ever real, or if I was just convenient. Take your time. You don't have to make any permanent decisions right now. The important thing is that you're protecting yourself while you figure it out. On day 5, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Matthew standing on the porch, looking uncomfortable. Mom, can we talk? I hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. We sat in the living room, an awkward silence stretching between us. Dad's staying at my house, he finally said. He and Rebecca aren't getting along very well. I'm not surprised, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Mom, I want to apologize. I should have stood up for you. I should have insisted you be included in the trip. I got caught in the middle. Did you choose a side? Matthew? He looked down at his hands. I guess I did choose. And I chose wrong. I felt my resolve softening, but I reminded myself of all I'd discovered. An apology is a start, but it doesn't undo the damage. I know. Rebecca and I have been fighting constantly since we got back. She says I need to choose between you and her. And what do you think about that? I think it's unfair. I think I shouldn't have to choose between my wife and my mother. No, you shouldn't. But that's not what this is about. Matthew, this isn't about choosing me over Rebecca. It's about recognizing when someone is manipulating you, when they're trying to isolate you from people who love you. He was quiet for a long moment. She says you're controlling, that you never gave us space to be our own family. I took a deep breath. Maybe there's some truth to that. I've been thinking a lot about how I may have been too involved in your life. But Matthew, there's a difference between asking for boundaries and systematically cutting someone out of your life. There's a difference between wanting independence and lying to someone who loves you. I know. I don't know how to fix this. Start by being honest. With me. With Rebecca. With yourself. And about the money. I can't pay it back right now. Mom, we're barely making the mortgage as it is. I figured as much. Here's what I propose. You'll pay me $200 a month until it's paid off. No interest, but no missed payments either. And Matthew, I'm not bailing you out anymore. No more emergency loans, no more helping with bills. You and Rebecca need to live within your means. He nodded slowly. That's fair. More than fair, actually. And one more thing. I want regular time with just you and me. No Rebecca. Once a month. We have lunch. Just the two of us. She won't like that. I'm not asking her to like it. I'm asking you to stand up for our relationship. Matthew stood to leave, pausing at the door. Mom, what are you going to do about Dad? That depends on your father. The ball is in his court right now. He misses you, you know. He's just too proud to admit it. Pride has always been Edward's problem, but this time, it's going to cost him something. After Matthew left, I sat for a long time, thinking about what he'd said. Edward missed me. But was that enough? Did he miss me as a partner, as an equal, or did he just miss the comfortable life I'd provided? On day 7, the deadline I'd given Edward, my phone rang. His name flashed on the screen. "Hello, Edward. Nancy, we need to talk, in person." "All right, when? I can be there in an hour." "I'll be here." I spent that hour preparing myself, mentally and emotionally. Whatever Edward decided, I needed to be ready. I changed into a blue dress he'd always complimented, not to impress him, but to remind myself of my own worth. I made a pot of coffee, set out 2 mugs, and waited. When the doorbell rang, my heart jumped, but I took a deep breath and opened the door. Edward stood there, looking older somehow, more diminished than I'd ever seen him. He'd always carried himself with such confidence, such assurance. Now he seemed uncertain, almost fragile. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. We sat in the kitchen, the same room where we'd had our confrontation days earlier. The silence stretched between us, heavy with 43 years of shared history. "I've been staying with Matthew," he finally said. "So I heard. How's that working out?" "Not well. Rebecca and we're not compatible as housemates." "I'm not surprised. Rebecca seems to have difficulty with anyone who doesn't bend to her will." Edward shifted uncomfortably. "Nancy, I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us. About what happened. And I want to come home. I want us to work this out." I studied his face, looking for sincerity, for real understanding. "Why?" "Why now? Edward, is it because you've discovered that Matthew's house isn't comfortable, because your credit cards don't work anymore, or is it because you've genuinely realized that what you did was wrong?" He looked away. "It's not about the money or comfort. It's about us. 43 years. Nancy, that has to count for something." "It counts for everything. Edward, that's why your betrayal hurt so deeply. 43 years. And you thought nothing of lying to me, of excluding me, of trying to take control of my finances. I never—" "You did. James showed me the paperwork. You were inquiring about power of attorney, about transferring assets out of my name." "Why? What were you planning?" "Edward," he was quiet for a long moment. "I was worried about you. You seemed forgetful sometimes, confused. I thought it would be prudent to make arrangements." "Arrangements for what?" "For when I was no longer competent to manage my own affairs. Edward, I had a full cognitive evaluation yesterday. Would you like to know the results?" He looked up, surprised. "Dr. Mendez, one of the top neurologists in the state, found me to be completely competent. No signs of cognitive decline whatsoever. So tell me again why you were making arrangements behind my back." Edward's face flushed. "It wasn't like that. Rebecca suggested what? That I was losing my mind, that you needed to protect the family assets from me, and you believed her over your own observations of your wife of 43 years. I made a mistake, Nancy, a terrible mistake. I let Rebecca's concerns influence me too much. I should have talked to you directly. Yes, you should have, but you didn't, and that's what I'm struggling with. Edward, not just the trip, not just the financial maneuvering, it's the pattern of deception. It's the willingness to believe the worst of me instead of having an honest conversation." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden we'd planted together years ago. "I've been doing a lot of thinking too, Edward, about what I want for the rest of my life. I'm 67 years old. How many good years do I have left? 10, 20. If I'm lucky, I don't want to spend them feeling invisible in my own home, irrelevant in my own family." "You're not irrelevant to me, Nancy." I turned back to face him. "Aren't I? You went to Spain without me. You made financial decisions without me. You let Rebecca speak for you, for Matthew, for our entire family. If that's not making me irrelevant, I don't know what is." Edward stood up, moving toward me. "I want to make it right." "Tell me how to make it right." "It's not that simple. This isn't about making one grand gesture or saying the right words. This is about a fundamental shift in how we relate to each other. If we're going to stay married, Edward, things have to change. I won't go back to being the silent partner, the one who makes everything work behind the scenes while being excluded from the important decisions. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you want to come home, it's under new terms. First, we start marriage counseling immediately. Second, you cut the financial ties with Matthew and Rebecca. No more loans that never get repaid. No more subsidizing their lifestyle. Third, you acknowledge to them that what happened was wrong, and you take responsibility for your part in it. Edward was quiet, considering my words, and if I agree to all that, then we try. That's all I can offer right now. Edward, we try to rebuild what's been broken. But I need you to understand something. I've changed. These past few days, being on my own, making my own decisions, it's been surprisingly liberating. I'm not the same woman you left behind when you went to Spain. What does that mean? It means I've booked a trip to Italy for February, alone. It means I've joined an art class and reconnected with friends you never liked. It means I'm living for myself now, not just for you or for Matthew. If you can accept that version of me, then maybe we have a chance. Edward sat back down, looking stunned. You're going to Italy alone. Yes, it's something I've always wanted to do. And now I'm doing it. But we always talked about going to Europe together. No, Edward, I talked about going to Europe. You talked about why we shouldn't, the expense, the language barrier, how European food disagreed with you. Well, I'm going now, with or without your approval. He was quiet for a long moment. You really have changed. Yes, I have. The question is whether you can change too. Edward looked down at his hands, then back at me. I want to try. Nancy, I don't want to lose you. These past few days, they've been a wake-up call. I don't like who I became under Rebecca's influence. I don't like the choices I made. Then prove it. Not with words, but with actions. I will. I promise. I nodded, not quite ready to believe him yet. You can move back in tomorrow. The guest room is made up. We'll take it from there. The guest room. Yes, Edward. I'm not ready to share a bed with you yet. That level of intimacy requires trust, and you've broken mine. We'll need to rebuild it step by step. He looked like he wanted to protest, but then nodded. I understand. Thank you, Nancy, for giving us another chance. After Edward left, I sat alone in the quiet house, thinking about the conversation. Had I made the right choice? Only time would tell. But for the first time in our marriage, I'd set the terms. I'd established the boundaries. I'd made the decisions not based on what would make Edward happy, but on what I needed to feel respected and valued. It felt strange and new. This sense of agency. I wasn't just Edward's wife or Matthew's mother anymore. I was Nancy Clark, a woman with her own desires, her own boundaries, her own life to live. My phone rang. It was James. Nancy, I wanted to let you know that Edward came to see me today. He was asking about reversing some of the financial changes you made. My heart sank. So much for his promises of change. What exactly did he want? James, he wanted to know if he could be added back to the joint accounts, if the credit cards could be reactivated. I told him I could only take direction from you since the accounts are in your name. Thank you, James. And what was his response? He seemed frustrated but resigned. He said to tell you he understands if you're not ready yet, but he hopes you'll reconsider once things are more stable between you. I considered this. Edward had gone to James before coming to me, which wasn't a great sign, but his message showed a hint of respect for my decisions that hadn't been there before. Thanks for letting me know. James, I appreciate your transparency. Of course, Nancy, and for what it's worth, I think you're handling this situation with remarkable grace and strength. After I hung up, I made another decision. I called Dr. Torres. Samantha, I need you to draft a post-nuptial agreement. If Edward and I are going to stay married, I want legal protection for my assets. That's a wise precaution. Nancy, I'll draw up the paperwork and have it ready for review next week. The next day, Edward moved back into the house, into the guest room as we'd agreed. It was strange having him there again, hearing his footsteps in the hallway, smelling his aftershave in the bathroom. We circled each other cautiously, like dancers learning a new routine. Our first marriage counseling session was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, we established a tentative peace, each of us careful not to disturb the fragile truce. One evening, as we sat in the living room reading, me with my novel, Edward with his financial magazine, my phone rang. It was Matthew. "Mom, can I come over? I need to talk to you and Dad together." "Of course. Matthew, is everything all right?" "Not really, but I'll explain when I get there." An hour later, Matthew sat across from us, looking exhausted and defeated. "Rebecca and I are separating," he said without preamble. "She's moving out this weekend." Edward and I exchanged glances. "I'm sorry, son," Edward said. "What happened?" Matthew ran a hand through his hair. "Everything. This whole situation made me see things differently. The way she talked about Mom. The way she manipulated all of us. I started noticing patterns I'd been ignoring for years." "Are you sure this is what you want?" I asked gently. "No, I'm not sure of anything right now, but I know I can't keep living like this. The constant drama, the financial pressure, the way she tries to control everything and everyone." He looked at me directly. "You were right, Mom. She was isolating me from the people who love me." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry, Matthew. Despite everything, I know this must be painful for you." "It is, but it's also a relief. In a way, like I can finally be myself again." "Where will Rebecca go?" Edward asked. "She's moving in with her sister in Phoenix. She's already talking about suing me for alimony, though I don't know what she thinks she's going to get. We're practically broke." "Let's cross that bridge when we come to it," I said. "For now, focus on taking care of yourself. And Matthew, I want you to know that while I'm still holding you to our agreement about the money, you have my emotional support, completely and unconditionally." His eyes filled with tears. "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot." After Matthew left, Edward and I sat in silence for a long time. "I didn't see that coming," Edward finally said. "Really, I'm surprised. The signs were all there. I guess I wasn't looking, or maybe I didn't want to see. That seems to be a pattern for you, Edward." He looked at me sharply, then his expression softened. "You're right. I've been blind to a lot of things, including how much I was hurting you." For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. It wasn't enough to heal everything, but it was a start. The next few weeks were a blur of changes. Matthew and Rebecca's separation turned into divorce proceedings, with Rebecca demanding far more than Matthew could possibly provide. Edward and I attended weekly counseling sessions, slowly unraveling the patterns that had led us to this point, and I continued preparing for my trip to Italy, refusing to put my plans on hold despite Edward's hints that he might like to join me. "This is something I need to do for myself," I explained. "Maybe next time we can travel together, but this trip is mine." He nodded, clearly disappointed but respecting my decision. It was a small victory, but a significant one. One afternoon, I was sorting through old photo albums when I found a picture of Edward and me from our early days, standing on a beach in Florida, young and in love. I studied our faces, trying to remember what it had felt like to be that couple, so full of hope, so certain of our future together. Edward found me there, tears streaming down my face. "Nancy, what's wrong?" I showed him the photo. "I was just wondering where those two people went. When did we stop being them?" He sat beside me, taking the photo gently. "We're still them, just older, maybe a little lost for a while, but we can find our way back. Can we? So much has happened. Edward, so much trust has been broken. I know, but 43 years has to count for something. Remember you said that yourself." I looked at him, really looked at him, the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the familiar curve of his smile. Despite everything, There was still something there, some echo of the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. It does count, I said softly, but it's not enough on its own. We have to build something new, something based on mutual respect and honesty. I'm trying, Nancy, I really am. And he was, in small ways, day by day. Edward was showing me that he could change. He'd stopped questioning my decisions about finances. He'd started taking responsibility for his role in the Spain debacle. He'd even confronted Rebecca when she'd called, raging about the divorce settlement, and defended me when she'd tried to blame me for everything. It wasn't perfect. We still had moments of tension, days when the hurt felt too fresh to move past. But we were trying, and for now, that had to be enough. The day before I left for Italy, Edward helped me pack, making suggestions about what I might need, researching the weather in Tuscany in February. It was the kind of thoughtful gesture that had been missing from our relationship for too long. As I zipped up my suitcase, he handed me a small box. "What's this?" I asked. "Just a little something for your trip." "Open it." Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal, the cover embossed with my initials. "I thought you might want to document your adventures," he said. "And maybe, when you come back, you can share them with me." I ran my fingers over the soft leather, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you, Edward. I will." That night, as I lay in bed thinking about the journey ahead, both the literal journey to Italy and the metaphorical journey of rebuilding my life, I felt a strange sense of gratitude for the pain of the past few months. If Rebecca hadn't sent that devastating text, if I hadn't discovered the extent of their deception, I might never have found the strength to demand more from my relationships, to prioritize my own needs and desires. Sometimes I realized the most valuable gifts come from the most unexpected sources. And the gift Rebecca had inadvertently given me was the chance to rediscover myself, to reclaim my power, to remember that I mattered, not just as a wife or a mother, but as a woman in my own right. Tomorrow I would board a plane to Italy, alone but not lonely, uncertain but not afraid. For the first time in decades, I was writing my own story, charting my own course, and whatever happened next, with Edward, with Matthew, with the rest of my life, I would face it on my own terms, with my eyes wide open and my heart finally, truly my own. 6 months later, I was sitting in a cafe in Florence, watching the sunrise paint the Duomo in shades of gold and pink, when my phone buzzed with a text from Matthew. "Mom, please call me. We need to talk." I set the phone aside without responding and took another sip of my cappuccino. The Italian trip I'd booked in my moment of defiance had turned into something much more significant. What was supposed to be a 2-week tour had become a 3-month adventure of self-discovery. After my family crisis in January, I'd spent exactly 1 week watching Edward navigate our new arrangement. He'd been trying. I had to give him credit for that. He attended our counseling sessions, stayed respectfully in the guest room, and made genuine efforts to rebuild trust. But something still felt off, like we were playing roles in a polite drama rather than truly reconnecting. On the day before my scheduled departure to Italy, I'd sat him down for a difficult conversation. "Edward, I need more time and space to figure out what I want." His face had fallen. "You're not coming back after your trip, are you?" "I am, but I'm extending my stay. Instead of 2 weeks, I'm going to stay for at least a month, maybe more." "A month, Nancy. That's necessary." I'd finished firmly. "I need this time. Edward, I need to remember who I am outside of this marriage, outside of being Matthew's mother. I've spent 43 years defining myself by my relationships to other people. Now I need to define myself for myself." He'd been quiet for a long moment. "I understand. I don't like it, but I understand." And so I'd gone to Italy with an open return date, relieved that I'd at least been honest with him. The first 2 weeks had been exactly as planned: the guided tour of Tuscany, the cooking classes, the wine tastings. But as the tour ended and the other travelers returned home, I'd found myself reluctant to leave. On impulse, I'd contacted a small bed and breakfast in Siena where we'd stayed during the tour. The owner, Sofia Bianchi, a widow about my age, had a small apartment attached to her villa that she sometimes rented to long-term guests. "Stay as long as you like," she'd said in her excellent English when I inquired about availability. "It's nice to have company, especially someone who appreciates Siena beyond the tourist spots." That had been the beginning of an unexpected friendship and a whole new chapter of my journey. Sophia had introduced me to her friends, shown me local markets and hidden restaurants that tourists never found, and taught me to make pasta the proper Italian way. Not from a box, Nancy never from a box, through Sophia. I'd met a small group of expatriates and locals who gathered weekly for conversation and wine. For the first time in decades, I was making friends based solely on shared interests rather than through Edward or Matthew's connections. I was having conversations that had nothing to do with family obligations or household management. I was discovering a Nancy Clark I'd never known existed, one who had opinions about art and politics, who enjoyed debating philosophy over long dinners, who could navigate a foreign city on her own and manage just fine. Thank you very much. I'd called Edward weekly, keeping him updated on my adventures. At first, his responses had been strained, but gradually he'd seemed to accept that this extended time away was something I truly needed. Matthew had called less frequently, struggling with his own issues as his divorce from Rebecca proceeded. Now, in my final week in Italy, sitting in this Florence cafe with Matthew's text message waiting for a response, I felt a strange reluctance to re-engage with the complications of home. Here, in this beautiful city, thousands of miles from my normal life, I'd found a peace I hadn't experienced in years. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Matthew. "Mom, please, it's important," with a sigh. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. "Mom, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for weeks." "I've been busy," I said, watching an early morning street cleaner move methodically down the cobblestone street. "Mom, we need to talk. Things have been difficult since you left." "I didn't leave. Matthew, I went on vacation." "There's a difference. It's been 3 months." "Yes, it has. It's been wonderful." There was a pause. "Mom, I think I owe you an apology." "You think?" "I know I do. We all do. What we did was wrong." I waited. In the old days, I would have rushed to make him feel better, to smooth over the discomfort. Now, I let him sit with it. "Rebecca and I are officially divorced," he said finally. I felt a complicated mix of emotions, relief, sadness for him, and something that might have been vindication. "I'm sorry to hear that, Matthew. Are you—" "I'm sorry that your marriage failed. I'm not sorry that you're no longer with someone who encouraged you to treat me badly. She said you'd be happy about this. What I'm happy about is that you're calling me yourself instead of having her manage our conversation." Another pause. "Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking about what you said, about how we treated you. You were right. About what specifically? About everything. The lying, the manipulation, the way we excluded you. It was cruel. Yes, it was. I want to make things right. What does that mean to you, Matthew? I want us to have a relationship again, a real one, not the fake, polite version we've had for the past few years." I looked out at the Florentine street, watching people hurry past with their morning routines, their everyday concerns. How simple life could be when you weren't constantly managing other people's emotions. "Matthew, I appreciate the apology, but I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person who left for Italy 3 months ago." "What do you mean?" "I mean I've learned to be happy without you. Without any of you. And while I'd like to have a relationship with my son, I don't need one. Not if it's going to cost me my peace of mind." "Mom, let me finish. For 43 years, I organized my life around other people's needs. I made myself smaller so others could be bigger. I accepted crumbs of affection and called it love." I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "I won't do that anymore. Matthew, if you want a relationship with me, it has to be because you value me, not because you need something from me. I do value you. Then prove it, not with words, but with actions. Consistent respectful actions over time. How do I do that? Start by taking responsibility for your choices instead of blaming Rebecca for everything. She didn't force you to lie to me. She didn't make you exclude me from Christmas. Those were your decisions. Silence. She made it seem like including you would ruin everything. And you chose to believe her instead of talking to me directly. Yes, I did. And I'm sorry. It was the first time he'd taken full responsibility without deflecting blame. Thank you for saying that. Mom, when are you coming home? Next week. Can I see you when you get back? I thought about it. The old Nancy would have said yes immediately, eager to rebuild the relationship regardless of the cost. The new Nancy had different priorities. Matthew, I'll be back next Thursday. If you'd like to have coffee with me the following Saturday, we can do that. But I need you to understand that I'm not coming back to the life I left. Things will be different. Different how? I'm going to be living for myself now. I'm going to pursue my own interests, maintain my own friendships, make my own decisions. If you want to be part of that life, you're welcome. But you won't be the center of it. After I hung up, I sat for a long time watching Florence wake up around me. In a few days, I'd be back in my empty house, starting over at 67. Some people might see that as sad or frightening. I saw it as liberation. Sophia found me there an hour later, still nursing my cold cappuccino and smiling at nothing in particular. You look peaceful, she observed, sitting down across from me. I feel peaceful. Your son, he called, yes, he wants to apologize, to rebuild our relationship. And you, what do you want? It was such a simple question, but it had taken me 67 years to learn how to answer it honestly. I want to go home and create a life that makes me happy. If my family wants to be part of that, they'll need to earn their place. But if they don't, I'll be just fine without them. Sophia raised her espresso cup in a small toast. To women who learn to save themselves, I clinked my cup against hers, thinking about the text message that had started this whole journey. Rebecca had been right about one thing. She'd gone to Spain with the ones who really mattered. She just hadn't understood that the person who mattered most was me. The flight home was long, and I used the time to reflect on all that had happened since that fateful December day. I discovered my own strength, certainly, but I'd also learned something about forgiveness. Not the easy, automatic forgiveness I'd always given, wiping away hurts before they'd even fully registered. This was a different kind, a forgiveness that came after accountability, after change, after respect had been reestablished. I still didn't know if I could fully forgive Edward or Matthew, but I was open to the possibility, and that felt like enough for now. When I landed at the airport, I was surprised to see Edward waiting at the arrival gate, holding a small bouquet of daisies, my favorite flowers, not the roses he usually bought. Welcome home, he said simply. Thank you. How did you know which flight I was on? Matthew told me. I hope it's okay that I came. I studied his face, looking for signs of the old Edward, the one who would have been irritated by my extended absence, who would have made subtle comments about the expense or the inconvenience. Instead, I saw only genuine warmth and perhaps a touch of nervousness. It's fine, I said, accepting the flowers. Thank you for coming. In the car, Edward caught me up on what had happened while I was away. Matthew's divorce was final, and he was adjusting to life as a single man again. Rebecca had indeed moved to Phoenix, but was still causing problems, calling Matthew at all hours with new demands or accusations. She tried to get me to testify that you were mentally unstable, Edward said quietly. She thought it would help her case for a larger settlement. I nearly dropped the flowers. She wanted me to say that we were concerned about your mental health, that the trip to Spain was actually a break for you, not us. That's why we didn't include you. And what did you say? Edward's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I told her to go to hell. I looked at him in surprise. I'm not proud of how I behaved, Nancy. I let Rebecca manipulate me, just like she manipulated Matthew. But I've had my wake-up call. I won't be party to any more lies. It was the most direct acknowledgement he'd made of his role in the whole mess. I felt something inside me soften slightly. Thank you for that, Edward. You don't need to thank me for basic decency, but I appreciate it anyway. When we arrived home, I was struck by how different the house looked. There were fresh flowers on the hall table, the curtains had been changed, and there was a new painting on the living room wall, a landscape of Tuscany that Edward must have bought while I was away. I made a few changes, he said, noticing my surprise. I hoped you might like them. It's lovely, I said honestly. Very thoughtful. I've been reading your emails about Italy, looking at the photos you sent. I wanted you to feel like some of that beauty came back with you. It was such a surprisingly considerate gesture that I didn't quite know how to respond. This was not the Edward I'd left behind 3 months ago. I made up the master bedroom for you. He continued. I've been using the guest room, as we agreed, but if you'd prefer that I stay elsewhere for a while, give you some space to readjust, I can do that. No, I said after a moment's consideration. This arrangement is fine for now. But Edward, I meant what I said before I left. Things are going to be different. I understand, and I respect that. I've been seeing Dr. Harrison on my own, in addition to our couples counseling. Dr. Harrison was our marriage counselor. You have? He nodded. I needed to understand why I acted the way I did, why I was so easily influenced by Rebecca, why I could betray someone I've loved for over 4 decades. And have you found any answers? Enough to know that I don't like the man I became. Enough to want to be better. He hesitated. But that's a conversation for another time. You must be exhausted from your journey. Can I make you some tea, or would you prefer to rest? I was touched by his consideration. Tea would be nice, thank you. As Edward busied himself in the kitchen, I wandered through the house, reacquainting myself with spaces that somehow felt both familiar and strange. In my absence, Edward had not only maintained everything beautifully, but had made small, thoughtful changes. A new throw pillow in my favorite color, fresh plants in the sunroom, my favorite novels arranged prominently on the bookshelf. It was as if he'd been preparing for my return by creating a home that reflected my tastes and preferences. Not just his. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it spoke volumes about his efforts to change. Later that evening, as we sat in the living room with our tea, Edward handed me a manila envelope. What's this? I asked. Something I've been working on with Samantha. I want you to look it over. Take your time with it. There's no rush to decide anything. Inside was a revised postnuptial agreement, one that was even more favorable to me than the one Samantha had originally drafted. It explicitly protected all of my assets, acknowledged my right to maintain separate finances, and included provisions for my continued independence within the marriage. Edward, this is unexpected. Is it? It shouldn't be. It's what you deserve. Protection, security, autonomy. All the things I tried to take from you before. I studied his face, looking for signs of resentment or reluctance, but found none. Thank you, I said simply. I'll review it carefully. Of course. And Nancy, I want you to know that whether you decide to sign it or not, whether you decide to continue our marriage or not, I'm grateful for the wake-up call. I needed it more than I knew. The next day, I met with Samantha to discuss the agreement Edward had presented. He came to me about a month after you left, she explained. Said he wanted to make things right, legally and otherwise. This agreement was his idea, not mine. And you think it's solid? More than solid. It's one of the most generous postnuptial agreements I've ever seen. He's essentially saying that what's yours stays yours, no matter what happens. What prompted this? Do you think? Samantha leaned back in her chair. People can change. Nancy, not everyone, and not always in the ways we hope. But sometimes a crisis forces them to confront truths they've been avoiding. I think that's what happened with Edward. And you believe he's sincere. I do. But more importantly, do you? I thought about it. I'm starting to, but I've been wrong before. Then take your time. There's no rush to sign anything or make any permanent decisions. See if his actions continue to match his words. That Saturday, I met Matthew for coffee as promised. He was waiting for me at the cafe, looking nervous but determined. "You look different, Mom," he said as I sat down. "Italy agreed with you." It did. I found parts of myself there that I'd forgotten existed. "I'm glad, and I'm sorry I never encouraged you to travel before. Dad said you always wanted to go to Europe." "Yes, well, better late than never." We chatted about my trip for a while, Matthew asking thoughtful questions about the places I'd visited, the people I'd met. He seemed genuinely interested, not just making polite conversation. "I sold the SUV," he said abruptly, changing the subject. "Got a much more practical car instead." "Oh, yeah, and I've been putting money aside each month, like we agreed. I should have the next payment for you next week." "Thank you, Matthew. I appreciate your responsibility." He fidgeted with his coffee cup. "Mom, there's something else I need to tell you. Something I'm not proud of." I waited, giving him space to continue. "Last year, before all this happened, Rebecca and we were talking about having you declared incompetent. Not right away, but eventually. She had this whole plan worked out. Though I'd suspected as much, hearing it confirmed felt like a physical blow. I see. It was wrong, Mom, so wrong. And I went along with it because I don't even know why. Because it was easier than standing up to her. Because I'd started to believe her when she said you were declining. Because I was weak." "That must have been difficult to admit," I said carefully. "It is. But you deserve the truth. All of it." He took a deep breath. "Dad didn't know about this part. Rebecca and I kept it from him because we thought he might object. The plan was to wait until after the holidays, then start suggesting more openly that you needed to be evaluated. And then take control of my assets, put me in a home. No, at least, that's not what I thought the plan was. Rebecca said it was just about making sure you were safe, that your money was protected. But looking back, I think her intentions were exactly what you're suggesting." I sat back, processing this new information. "Thank you for telling me. Matthew, it couldn't have been easy." "Do you hate me?" he asked quietly. "No, Matthew. I don't hate you. I'm disappointed and hurt, but I don't hate you. You're my son, and I love you. That hasn't changed. What has changed is my willingness to let love be an excuse for poor treatment. I understand, and I want to earn your trust back. Mom, I really do. That will take time and consistent effort. I know. I'm prepared for that." We finished our coffee in a thoughtful silence, then walked together to the park nearby. As we strolled along the path, Matthew told me about his plans to go back to school for a master's degree, something he'd always wanted but Rebecca had discouraged. She said it was a waste of money, that I'd never earn enough as a teacher to make it worthwhile. But I love teaching. Mom, I want to be the best at it I can be. Then you should absolutely pursue it. Education is never wasted. He smiled. That's what you always used to say when I was growing up. Some truths don't change, Matthew, even when everything else does. As the weeks passed, I settled into a new routine at home. Edward and I continued our counseling sessions, gradually rebuilding trust and establishing new patterns of communication. I joined a local art class and a book club, creating my own social circle independent of our shared friends. Edward found his own activities, a woodworking class and volunteer work at the local hospital. We were learning to be together in new ways, respecting each other's independence while still sharing a life. It wasn't always smooth. There were disagreements, misunderstandings, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But we were both committed to creating something better, something healthier. Matthew kept his word, calling regularly but not excessively, respecting my boundaries, taking responsibility for his actions. He returned to teaching, started his master's program in the evenings, and slowly began rebuilding his life without Rebecca's toxic influence. 3 months after my return from Italy, Edward and I were having dinner on our patio, enjoying the summer evening, when he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Are you happy, Nancy, with how things are between us now?" I considered the question carefully. I'm content, Edward, happier than I was before, certainly. But I'm still cautious. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend overnight. I understand that, and I'm grateful for every bit of trust you've been able to rebuild. He reached across the table, tentatively taking my hand. I miss you, though, not just physically, although there is that. I miss the intimacy we used to have, the sense that we were truly partners. I miss that too, I admitted. But I don't miss the inequality, the way my needs were always secondary. I can't go back to that. Edward, I won't. I wouldn't want you to. The woman you've become since everything happened, she's extraordinary. Strong, confident, clear about her own worth. I find myself falling in love with this version of you all over again. His words touched me deeply. Thank you for saying that. I mean it, Nancy, and I hope that someday, when you're ready, you might consider sharing your bedroom again as well as your life. I squeezed his hand. I'm not there yet, Edward, but I'm not ruling it out either. He nodded, accepting my answer without pressure or disappointment. It was another small sign of how far we'd come. The next day, I received an unexpected call from Eleanor. Nancy, I've been thinking, why don't you come visit me in Oregon for a few weeks? It's been years since we've spent any real time together. That's a lovely idea. Eleanor, let me check with Edward about the timing. Actually, she said hesitantly, I was thinking it might just be you, a sister's retreat. Like when we were young. I was surprised by the suggestion, but also intrigued. You know, that sounds wonderful. Let me look at my calendar and get back to you. When I mentioned the idea to Edward that evening, I was prepared for resistance, subtle or otherwise. Instead, he seemed genuinely supportive. You should absolutely go. Eleanor's right. You two haven't had quality time together in years. And autumn in Oregon is supposed to be beautiful. You wouldn't mind being on your own for a few weeks. Nancy, if the past 6 months have taught me anything, it's that our marriage is stronger when we both maintain our independence. Go. Enjoy your sister. I'll be here when you get back. It was such a marked change from the old Edward, who would have found a dozen reasons why such a trip was impractical or unnecessary, that I was momentarily speechless. Thank you, I said finally. That means a lot to me. 2 weeks later, I was sitting on Eleanor's porch in Oregon, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. You seem different, Nancy, she observed, handing me a glass of wine. Stronger somehow. I feel different. It's like I've finally given myself permission to exist on my own terms, not just as someone's wife or mother. It suits you. I always thought you lost something of yourself when you married Edward. Not that he's a bad man, necessarily, but you were always so careful to mold yourself to his expectations. I didn't realize I was doing it, I admitted. It happened so gradually, this slow erasure of the person I might have been. And now I'm finding out who that person is. It's terrifying and exhilarating, all at once. Eleanor raised her glass in a toast. To second chances. To becoming who we were meant to be, no matter how long it takes. We spent those weeks exploring the Oregon coast, hiking in the mountains, visiting small towns and hidden wineries. We talked for hours, reconnecting in a way we hadn't since before our marriages and children had taken us in different directions. One evening, as we sat by Eleanor's fireplace, she asked the question I'd been waiting for. Are you going to stay with Edward, really stay? I mean, not just go through the motions. I think so, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. He's changed. Eleanor, we've both changed, and what we're building now feels more genuine than what we had before. I'm glad. But Nancy, promise me one thing. Promise you won't lose yourself again. Not for him, not for Matthew, not for anyone. I promise, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. When I returned home, refreshed and rejuvenated from my time with Eleanor, I found Edward waiting with a surprise of his own. I've been thinking, he said as we sat in the living room after dinner. We never really had a proper honeymoon. We were too broke back then. Remember just that weekend at the lake? I smiled at the memory. I remember. You caught that enormous fish, and we had no idea how to cook it. Exactly. Well, I was wondering if you might consider a do-over. A real honeymoon. Anywhere you want to go. Edward, that's sweet. But before you say no, hear me out. This isn't about trying to recapture the past or pretend nothing happened. It's about starting fresh, creating new memories to build on. And this time, you choose the destination, the activities, everything. I'm just along for the ride. I considered his suggestion. That's actually a lovely idea. Let me think about where I might want to go. Take all the time you need. There's no rush. That night, for the first time in nearly a year, I invited Edward back into our bedroom. It wasn't a magical fixing of everything that had been broken between us. But it was a step forward, a conscious choice to rebuild our most intimate connection based on the new foundation we'd created. As we lay together in the darkness, I thought about the journey we'd taken, from betrayal to reconciliation, from hurt to healing. It hadn't been easy, and there were still moments when the pain resurfaced, when trust wavered. But we were moving forward, day by day, choice by choice. 6 months later, Edward and I were on a cruise ship headed for the Greek islands, my choice for our second honeymoon. We'd spent the day exploring Athens, and now stood on the deck watching the coastline recede as the ship set sail for Santorini. Happy? Edward asked, his arm around my waist. Very, I replied honestly. Thank you for suggesting this. Thank you for giving us another chance. I turned to face him. You know, in a strange way, I'm almost grateful for what happened last Christmas. Not for the hurt, obviously, but for the wake-up call. Without it, we might have continued indefinitely in that half-life we'd created, where neither of us was truly seen or valued. I've thought the same thing, Edward admitted, though I would have preferred a less painful catalyst for change. I laughed. Agreed. Back home, Matthew was thriving in his master's program and had recently started dating a fellow teacher, a woman who, unlike Rebecca, encouraged his relationship with me and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know his family. She wants to have you over for dinner next week. He told me before we left for Greece. If that's okay with you? I'd like that. Matthew, thank you for asking. Our relationships weren't perfect. There were still occasional tensions, moments of doubt, echoes of old hurts. But we were building something new and healthier on the ruins of what had been destroyed. And I was finally living a life that felt authentically mine, not defined solely by my roles as wife and mother, but by my own choices, interests, and boundaries. I thought often of that fateful text message from Rebecca, the one that had started it all. Only the ones who really matter, she'd written, excluding me from the family circle as if I were insignificant, dispensable. She'd been right about one thing. The Spain trip had indeed included only those who really mattered. She just hadn't understood that the person who mattered most was me, not because of what I could provide or how I could serve, but simply because I existed, because I had value and worth inherent to myself. It had taken a betrayal to teach me that lesson, to help me reclaim my power and my voice. And now, standing on the deck of a ship bound for Santorini, watching the sunset with the man who had finally learned to see and appreciate me as I truly was, I silently thanked Rebecca for the unintended gift she'd given me, the gift of remembering my own worth. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. If you enjoyed my story, you might also like 2 other channel favorites. My daughter stole my identity, so I let her go to prison, and my son-in-law banned me from his house until he saw my bank account.